Director of Education at CATCH. I'm going to be moderating today's Lunch and Learn about a topic that stemmed from a wonderful podcast that I discovered a few months ago. It's called Raising Parents with Emily Oster. If you haven't checked it out yet, I highly recommend it. Before I introduce today's speaker, I wanted to quickly mention that we are reserving right around the second half of our hour today for Q&A. Please don't be shy. Put any and all of your questions in the chat as you think of them, and we'll get to as many as we can before the hour is up. And for those of you who feel most comfortable asking your questions anonymously, you can private message them to Rachel T. or Rachel Sinberg, and she'll send them my way. And now I am honored to introduce you to today's speaker, Dr. Andrea Goddard. Dr. Goddard is a licensed clinical psychologist and the founder of Breakthrough Psychotherapy in Northfield. She earned her doctorate in clinical psychology from Adler University and gained extensive experience working in a myriad of settings before founding her own practice. Dr. Goddard specializes in using evidence-based practices to support individuals and families with more severe emotional vulnerabilities. Breakthrough Psychotherapy's concierge model allows their team to offer many options for therapeutic support and personal growth that are tailored to each client and family. And I can personally vouch for that, as I've had the wonderful opportunity to collaborate with her professionally on multiple occasions. And now I'm going to hand things over to you, Dr. Goddard. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Lisa. That was so nice. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad that we can have our lunch together. And so I thought before we jump in, most of us are transitioning away from our busy work days or something busy. I thought we could do a quick exercise so we could all be on the same page. And so I'd like us to take a minute and just think about our childhoods. And so in particular, as we're thinking about our childhood, what did we used to do for fun? What did we used to do when we were out of school, during our free time, whether it was weekends or any other time? I'd like us to think about who did we play with and what did we do? And so I'll give you guys a second to think about that. So I see running around the neighborhood with neighbor friends, capture the flag and hide and go seek. I say played outside with neighborhood kids, played with sister and friends, Barbie dolls, pretend when we were super little. I would put on plays and musicals with my sister. Gosh, you guys are so good at sharing. Thank you. Played with friends in the neighborhood. Okay, right. Played with friends and neighbor in the backyard digging for treasures. Awesome. Okay, these are great examples. Okay, well, now we got some themes there. Lots of playing with friends, lots of outside, lots of with neighbors. Now I want us to think about our own kids. So I'm going to assume that many of us are parents who are participating today. If you're not, that's fine. But think about your own kids. What do our kids do when they're not in school, either after school or on a weekend? And let's think about it I'll give you guys another 30 seconds to minute to think about that. Okay. So now that we've thought about our childhoods and our kids' childhood right now, or if you have multiple childhoods as well, I'd like us to think about the differences between the two, if there are differences. And if you guys want to write in the chat again and share, maybe you can provide me with some examples of just the differences. Are there any? Okay, structured activities are with an adult. Organized sports teams, technology, homework and activities. They are isolated. Video games, really working on decreasing scheduled activities and having kids play together. It's hard because most of their friends have activities. I take my kids to the park or playground, gym, Instagram or YouTube, video games. Okay, good, you guys, awesome. Okay, so if we look at the examples from our first thought experiment of our childhood, and then we think about our kids and what they're growing up with and going through. What stands out most, and the reason why I think we're all here, is that our kids have a tremendous amount of structured activities, and they're growing up with technology, which is totally different than what our childhood was like, than the olden days, we'll say. And so today, the title of the presentation is Overparenting Unplugged, How to Let Kids Thrive. And so as I thought more and more about this title and really read between the lines and boiled it down, what I thought would be most appropriate and what we're actually doing is training parents, how to train parents to be the best parents they can, because I know that's what we're all trying to do with the modern day pressures, the modern day influences of trying to help our kids thrive the best with an incessant amount of input, and how to strike a balance. So we'll figure it out. That's the goal. So, okay, hold on. I got to click back in. Okay. So I thought first I would share a little bit about what therapists are seeing now and what the research is showing. And it is a very bleak picture. And so I promise you, I'm not going to just continue to paint this really bleak, depressing picture throughout this entire 30-minute presentation. But the reality is that kids are worse off today than they were 30 years ago when we were kids. They're more anxious, they're more depressed, they're more medicated. Kids' anxiety and suicide rates are 3 times higher from 1950 to 2005. And also extremely alarming, 2 times higher from 2005 to 2020. Kids' reading and math scores have not recovered from the pandemic, and obesity is at an all-time high of roughly 20%. In the most recent CDC data, 40% of high school students indicated that within the last year, they experienced sadness that impacted their ability to do activities for at least 2 weeks. And so if you can imagine not being able to function for 2 weeks in high school, the demands that increase, it's alarming. And so kids are trying to manage this constant flow of information from news or social media, the pressures that are coming at them at home, at school, socially, extracurricularly, and they're struggling. It's apparent they're struggling. And so we need to understand why. So in our practice, I have been thinking about this for a while. We've been practicing. Our practice has been around for almost a year, but I've been a psychologist for almost 15 years. And what both the research and my clinical experiences have shown is that within these 3 contexts, the school context, the social context, wouldn't fit on this slide, it's on the next, but the family context, there are key patterns. And so first, in the school context, there are still, as I mentioned before, gaps in learning from the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, kids were struggling to grasp all of the information that is presented to them at the rate that it's presented to them. But that's not necessarily new. I mean, yes, technology has just increased the flow and the speed of information and the demands of information. What is ultimately happening is that kids are struggling to feel confident enough to raise their hand and ask for help, to self-advocate when they don't know the information. They don't know who to ask or how to ask or feel comfortable asking. I mean, we grew up in an era where we were always told there's no stupid question. Yes, that's true. And some of us were more willing and more brave. I can tell we have the brave crew here with willingness to participate. Kids today are struggling to get the resources, to ask for help, to make sure that they're getting what they need. And that's also parents. Parents don't necessarily know what their kids need. There's a disconnect between how much a kid struggles and what the parent understands their struggles to be, which we'll get into in a minute. Parents don't necessarily know what type of accommodations or if accommodations are appropriate, whether it's a 504 plan or an individualized education plan, how to ask for those, what those mean. And so fundamentally, there is a large disconnect between a child's ability to get all of the information that they need from school, to catch up from what they missed during the pandemic, and then to feel comfortable and confident enough to move forward. Within the social context, socialization has changed fundamentally since we were kids. We didn't grow up with computers. I think when I was a senior in high school, AOL, whatever it stands for, I don't know, instant messenger was just starting to become popular. Now, today, everyone socializes through technology, through FaceTime, through text messaging, through Snapchat, through Instagram. The problem with that is it doesn't develop the necessary social skills that kids need in order to observe and react to nonverbal language, in order to ask for clarification, in order to make sure that what they're actually understanding is an accurate interpretation of whatever the conversation is about. Fundamentally, this is leading to changes in social groups, cyberbullying, negative comments that are internalized just based on one picture that's posted on the internet. And so kids today are experiencing a high level of loneliness, continuous changes in friend group, feeling abandoned, feeling, again, alone, withdrawn. And it's horrible. It's really sad. And so fundamentally, part of this phenomenon with the difficulty of self-advocating and low self-esteem can be linked to a limited social freedom. And so the jump, I'll make sense of that connection. So when kids are allowed to be independent, like you guys mentioned from your childhood, when we're allowed to run around with our neighbors and bury treasures and dig them up, when we're allowed to run through the woods and stick sticks in the mud and watch what crawls out, or pick up rocks and watch all the bugs crawl, when we fall off our bike and are expected to get back up and try again, when we're not being rescued, when we have to go to our neighbor's house and ask for a snack or ask for help, when we need to run to Graders or run to the store, probably don't have to run to Graders, but get to go to the ice cream store and ask for ice cream and get the correct change back, all of that develops grit. And so grittiness from a psychological standpoint is an ability for a person to cope. To be resilient is another word, it's a synonym. So when we're resilient outside in our everyday life, I'm looking out the window because that's what I'm thinking about. But when we're outside in our everyday life and we get to try adventures, try new things, make mistakes, fail, fall, get hurt, hopefully not too hurt, but then go ask for help. When we take chances, what that does for our nervous system is it allows us to then cope when challenges are faced, both socially and at school. It allows us to persevere. It allows us to work through a challenging problem. Like when our teacher tells us, hey, you have a pop quiz, we don't melt down. When our teacher tells us you didn't understand this content, we can say, okay, can you help me please? Rather than shut down and shove it in our back, only to find out later that we're missing a lot of information. So it is that independence, that freedom, that separation and individuation that allows us as kids and then as teenagers and then young adults to launch into the next stage. And so we're going to get into how to support this skill deficit that we're seeing. So, hold on. Okay. So as both a psychologist and a mom, I ask myself, how did this happen? How have our kids become so anxious and so unhappy? And so in his newest book, The Anxious Generation from Jonathan Haidt, which Lisa did an awesome presentation in September, and then Emily Oster in her podcast, they both suggest that changes in childhood mental health are largely attributable to a lack of childhood and independence and to an increased reliance on technology. And both of these variables, the lack of independence and the technology, are truly re-hardwiring the brain. We know that kids are happier when we give them independence and more freedom. So our biggest challenge as parents is to resist these new norms of parenting, of modern day parenting, I should say, and also think about what our childhoods were like. And then strike a balance between the old and new, right? And so ideally, there's more freedom. There's less parental inputs, less structure, so more unstructured play, and more family connection. So I get it. I'm a mom. I work. My kids are busy, they're in school. So it's super easy for me to say, and I'm a psychologist, it's super easy for me to say, okay, let's remove technology. Let's schedule less. Okay, but the reality is it's so much easier said than done. And so I can give a quick example. My son is in kindergarten, he's 6. And so last night was his first night of lacrosse. And I'm laughing because my wife is here and I'm looking right at her. So we signed our son up for lacrosse and we think he'd be probably good at it. He loves running around. He's a really tall, big kid, and he loves running around carrying sticks. So we thought, okay, perfect. Generalization made. He probably could play lacrosse. But what we didn't consider is that it was one, on Monday night. Two, he has already plenty of activities. He does tutoring, he does basketball, he does ceramics, and he loves coming home from school and kid care and doing nothing, just playing with his sister, sometimes fighting with his sister, but just playing. And we took that from him last night. And so last night he came home and was so mad at us. And so I'm putting together this presentation. I'm listening to the podcast, I'm reading the books, and I'm saying, oh my gosh, I'm falling right into the trap that felt so natural for me to do, because many of his friends, by the way, in his class are also participating in this sport, in lacrosse on Monday nights. He was so upset. And so my wife and I thought, okay, let's listen to him. Okay, let's take a scoop of our own medicine and let's pull him out. And we did. Okay, he's not going to do it anymore. But what it showed me is the reality of the amount of pressure, the amount of demands that we're putting our kids through today. And again, it's so much easier said than done. And we thought we were doing our son the best that we could. So again, the idea is that we want our kids to be out, to be running, to be playing in our neighborhoods, to be challenging themselves and setting their own goals, and not being able to reach the highest branch on a tree, but trying again. We want them to be able to ride their bike and push themselves on their bikes to the place where then they realize that they've gone further and further, which then can be translated into school. But a big challenge is that no one else is doing it. So it's easy again for me to tell my kids to go play outside, which they'll do, but then they get tired of it because no one else in our neighborhood is playing outside. All the other kids are in structured activities. So from a community-based level, it's a much larger challenge of how do we remind parents that the benefits of unstructured play and structured sports are not unstructured play. Pro-social sports are so important. Pro-social activities, it doesn't have to be sports, but it could be anything, any STEM-related activity. But pro-social activities, structured activities, are not an opportunity for kids to experiment, to be creative, to do whatever they want to do, to make mistakes, to get upset, to cope, to learn that resilience that's so important in every other area of our life. So as parents, the idea is then, how do we tolerate both the lack of kids outside running around in the neighborhood, which for now may be out of our control, although I think sessions like this, lunch and learns, discussions like we had in September through CATCH, continuing the motivation and momentum to slow down on technology, to increase family connectedness, is where it starts. To making plans, having other parents who are similarly aligned in values and morals and ideas of how they want to raise their parents, connecting with them and scheduling get-togethers and just letting the kids be and let the parents talk if that works. But for parents, tolerating the boredom, tolerating the whining, tolerating the dysregulation, the tantrums is also a trick to being able to allow our kids the freedom and the independence that they need. Because kids, after coming off an overstimulated session with their video games or with their devices, they don't want to play outside. Playing outside is not exciting. Just like it's not exciting to stare at a sheet of paper when they're given a worksheet at school and being told to think about it. I mean, Roblox is way more exciting and way more enticing. And so we need to pull back a little bit, and we need to think about, how do we increase that connectedness? How do we as parents connect in a way with our kids that then can translate into feeling comfortable and confident, letting our kids run around the neighborhood? And so one of the skills that I thought was, one of the skills that I thought was key, and which I think I talk about more than any other skill as a child psychologist and as a family therapist, is a skill called validation. And it's a core skill, a basic skill. Basic not because it's simple, basic because it's just the foundation. So when we think about validation, it's a very long, fancy term for just understanding. And it's understanding what our children's experiences are, our spouse's experiences are, coworkers' experiences are, whoever it may be. But when people feel understood, what happens is their physiology, their biology changes. So typically what happens is it reduces that more fight or flight reaction, that power struggle that we often get in with our kids when we tell them to go run around and play outside and they do it for 5 minutes and then they want to come back in and look at their iPad or video game. And we're like, that was not long enough. You got to go back out there. And so validation helps our children not only feel understood, it also helps them communicate more. It reduces that vicious negative cycle, that fight or flight, that power struggle, that aggression, that refusing to talk, the shutting down. It reduces all of that. And when we as parents feel like we're understanding our kids more, feeling like they're making choices that we can trust are going to keep them safe. Kids are extremely resilient, by the way. But when we can see that in them, when we can hear that in them, as parents, we feel much more comfortable allowing them to cross a busier street, allowing them to ride their bike a little bit further, allowing them to go into a neighbor's house and run around and play, knowing that one, they're going to use their manners, but two, they're not going to get in trouble or nothing bad is going to happen to them. So validation, again, lets our kids know that the relationship matters. And I think I'm preaching to the choir here because all of you are here as an interest in being the best parents you can be. But what validation does is it lets our kids know that we're there, we're ready to listen, we're ready to try and understand their experiences. And we're going to do it without getting angry or jumping to conclusions or problem solving. And again, by understanding our kids better, ultimately, what happens is we allow them to have more freedom. We allow them to do more of what they want to do. And we can understand more why it's so hard for them to put down the device, or they can understand more why we want them to put down the device. So what do we validate? The idea is we want to validate another person's feelings, their thoughts, and their actions, and that it all makes sense. Invalidation would say it's just quick problem solving. What you're doing makes no sense. I can give a quick example, and I'm looking at the time, but we're good. So I have a daughter. I have a son and a daughter. My daughter's younger than my son. And for the first, I would say maybe even the first month of this new school year, she would get in the car every night. I usually pick her up. And I've learned now not to ask, how was your day? I don't ask anything. We just get in the car and we turn on her favorite songs. And then by stop sign 2, she's willing to share. So I could tell from my rear view mirror that she looked unhappy. She actually looked very sad. And so I'd ask, what's wrong, honey? And she said, no one on the playground wanted to play with me. And I immediately went into change and solution talk. I said, okay, her name is Ruby. I can share. I said, okay, Ruby, well, did you try playing with other friends? Did you try asking them in a different way or asking them politely to play? Did you ask your teacher? Did you go and play soccer? I know that they play soccer every day and she sort of likes soccer. So I kept trying to come up with solutions. All I got was silence. She said no, and that was the end. She just stared out the window, looking even more dejected, even more upset. And so I realized that what I was doing was invalidating. It was not allowing her to, one, feel the feelings she was having, but two, feel okay that she felt alone, felt, I guess, left out, felt confused about what to do. So once I started to say that it does feel upsetting, you do feel sad, it's really hard to not be included. A couple days of that, then I was able to ask her if she was interested in learning what to do or some strategies that she could try. And sure enough, she was. So it's not to say that it's perfect. It's not it's not the simplest skill. It is a way that we can help our kids not only understand the skills that they need, that they may be missing in order to self-advocate, but also we can understand what our kids are going through and then feel much more comfortable pushing them out the door and tolerating their reaction when we aren't going to give them their iPads anymore. So these are just some examples of validating statements, and I'm not going to read through them, but the basic premise of validation is that we're actively listening and we're just putting forth an effort to slow down, to put down our phones, to stop looking at our computers, stop work, and just try and understand what they're going through without problem solving. And this creates a much safer, more trusting environment and increases the likelihood that conversations like this can happen in the future. And so the point of bringing this particular skill to a presentation like this is that when we feel like we understand our kids more, when they feel more connected to us, we as parents feel much more confident promoting their autonomy, promoting their resilience, promoting their independence, trusting that they are going to make the right choices, that it's okay that they're bored, that it's actually really important that they're bored. And as soon as kids are bored, then they get creative. And then they decide, okay, well, maybe I'll go ride my bike and maybe I'll ride it a little bit further than I did last time. And that goal pushing, that striving is what's needed and what is missing when they're staring in front of an iPad or a device in the afternoons. And again, there's no perfect formula. So very quickly, what validation does not is agreement. So just because we're validating does not mean that we're agreeing with all that kids are doing and saying. We aren't going to let our kids do whatever they want. It doesn't mean lowering expectations or turning education into entertainment. It's not like that. It just allows our kids to then communicate what they need, what their interests are. Maybe, like Lisa mentioned in September, asking our kids what's something you'd like to do that you haven't been able to do, and then allowing them to do that. That's a big follow through, is a really important part of that question. But this connection that we get through validation gives our kids the confidence to make choices, to try new things, to identify and pursue their own goals, and helps them develop those goals. And achieving and trying those goals, or actually failing the goals and trying again, is what allows our kids to develop the strategies they need that are lacking at school, socially, sometimes at home, so that we can feel like our kids are having a much fuller childhood, and a childhood that's setting them up for success as young adults and adults. And so that's really the bulk of my presentation. And I think we're right on the 30-minute mark. So let's see, I'm going to just move forward here. Oh, okay. So one more thing. So here's my website. Here's my email. So I have an enormous list, enormous, like 150 ideas of planned positive activities between child and parent, and just child alone. So a lot of times parents will say to me, like, I don't know, like, what do we do? Like, outside of going to the movies, outside of taking my kids to the park, what can we do? So I have it for you. It just doesn't look very pretty when you put it on a slide because the font is like really small, and it's from dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, which is a treatment modality that I practice all day long, basically. And I'd be happy to share that with you. So if you have questions, email me and I can send it right to you or answer any questions. So I don't know if there are any additional questions or if there's anything to discuss. I'm happy to try.
Thank you, Andrea. That was amazing. I'm like neck crampy from all of my nodding. I'm like, yep, all of those things. And one thing that I really wanted to start with is this idea of, okay, we can validate their feelings and really help them feel more understood. And some of these things are frustrating. What about at a bigger level, like really thinking about the community, thinking about our kids' friends, and thinking about how can we go beyond validating? I get it. Like, you're outside playing and it's a little boring because there aren't any other kids out there. To how do we get more kids out there?
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts about that bigger next step?
Yeah, I do. So I think it starts here. I really think it starts here. And I think it started in September with the other catch talk. And I think it starts with really motivated parents who recognize this as a problem and who, well, a problem, I'll put it in quotes, because I think the idea is it's more of an opportunity to make an adjustment. And I think the more parents that can see that by getting together, by forcing the play dates, by setting down technology, by seeing the benefits of prioritizing our kids getting together with other kids. And we all have play dates. I mean, we do that already. But I think the goal would be, how do we do more of it? And how do we do it in a slightly less structured, less forced way, where it's just I'm picking up the phone and calling our best friends and they're going over to our friends' houses for an hour or two? How can we make it a little bit more I guess, unstructured, right? And I think it starts here. I think it starts with conversations. I think even from a community standpoint and even from a school standpoint, how can we empower our schools to promote less technology, not giving our kids cell phones until 8th grade or later? How can we help even social events if there are more within the community? I know our school, my kid's school, is getting a new principal. Perhaps there's an opportunity to meet with that principal and say, hey, is it possible to have a social? They do 2 a year, maybe just 1 a year. But it's events like that, and it's conversations like this that allow more community members to then go out and share the message, to allow us to say, well, I mean, I think I'm a little biased here, but for me to go to my neighbor and say, hey, like, let's just let our kids play. Like, when your kids are free, just text me, because chances are my kids are free. And so rather than scheduling it on a Saturday at 2 p.m., maybe it just becomes a little bit more free. I mean, I remember we had a phone with a cord that would wrap around my whole entire kitchen. And, my friends would call and they would say, are you free? And we'll just hang up the phone and run outside. And so more of that, more of what we used to do, while also appreciating that technology is a good thing and that it doesn't always have to be us running around, but the more running around we do, the better off we'll feel. So I don't know if that's
It for sure does. I mean, my experience has been exactly as you said, just finding a couple of people that feel this way too, and just starting with them and seeing what that ends up looking like for our kids. And then other people catch wind of it and are like, oh, okay, that sounds all right.
right.
You talked a lot about this, empowering them to become more independent. That's what builds their grit. I get a lot of questions from parents around, well, how do I know if this is something my child should be able to do on their own right now? Or are they not, not old enough, not responsible enough, not developed enough? A perfect example is talking to your teacher, right? If there is some sort of issue that the teacher needs to be made aware of, how do you advise parents around when they can figure out, like, I don't know, am I supposed to let them do that?
Yeah, well, so that's a really good question. And so I usually err on the side of, let's let the kid decide what they think they can do. So, for instance, the therapy model for gradual exposure therapy. So let's say someone had a fear of heights. Okay. It's just a simple model. Okay. To think about it this way. So when addressing a fear of heights, we would never say, like, as a therapist, I would never say, okay, let's go to the top of my building. This building that I'm in right now is 3 floors. Okay. And there is a way to get to the very top. And it's not that complicated. It's just walking up the stairs. So I would never say to this child or this individual who's afraid of heights, let's go to the top floor right now. Right. That would, 1, be flooding, and 2, they would run away, and 3, they would never come back. Right. But so we ask, as therapists and as parents, the approach would be to ask the kid what they think they can do and give them an opportunity to try. And if they try and don't succeed, that's great. That's actually almost better than if they succeed the first time. Because if they don't succeed, and it's a conversation, so we wouldn't just say, okay, go ask your teacher. You think you can ask your teacher, go ask your teacher, and not follow up with them. We would ask how it went. What did they learn? Whether they need additional help, whether they want us to help. And so sometimes our kids might say, like, I don't know, I can't do it. And you would say, okay, well, would you like me to help? And then I would encourage parents to explain to their kid what they are doing. So not just then get on the computer and type up an email and send it, but have your kids sit with you while you write the email, or have your kids come with you while you go into the school to talk to the teacher. Or if you can swing it, pick up your kid right after school and see if you can schedule a time to talk to your teacher, and have the kid there, if appropriate, obviously, so that they can hear the language. And so it's a dialogue. It's a back and forth in order to assess what the kids know and what they don't know, and then giving them the skills. So I don't
No, absolutely. What do you do if your preteen or kid or teen only wants to be home and hanging out in the rec room rather than playing outside, and they're the ones that seem resistant to this more independent type of play or to getting off of their technology?
Yeah, that's more often the case than not, right? It's actually the most common scenario that I see. Because again, like technology is so interesting and so fun, and it offers the benefits is that it offers really unlimited possibilities of information and entertainment and stimulation to the world, right? Like it's great. And there's a balance. And so this is where I think parents need to be sturdy parents, firm parents, and set limits. And I can't prescribe the amount of limits. I can't say like you only get 1 hour a day. That would not be helpful for me or appropriate for me to say right now. I do think as parents, though, as parents, it's our job to ensure that there are limits, there are parental controls on all devices. And that is the parent's job to set the limits and say that you can only have this amount of time. And once the screen time is up, it is up to you to decide what you want to do with yourself and time, but there will be no more screen time. And so kids will fight that one. They will tantrum, they will scream, they will just do nothing. Let that happen. That's actually really important. And it's our job as parents to tolerate their reaction and not react to it, not fight it, not give them 1,000 suggestions like I tried to do with my daughter, which didn't help. And so the idea would be once they're done tantruming, there is an extinction burst, which means they'll escalate before they de-escalate. As parents, we don't want to say, okay, now that you're escalating and screaming and crying, I'll give you your technology back. It's that once they're at a calmer place, we can maybe come up with suggestions, which is why I have that whole list of shared parent-child interaction and activities that they could do. And I cannot imagine out of a list of 150 activities that there isn't a single one. And kids may reject it at first, and after a while, you will be amazed. After a while, kids go to their own ways of filling their time, whether it's picking up clay, whether it's drawing, whether it's playing an instrument, whether it's literally just sitting there and observing and describing their fingernails. It doesn't matter, right? Let them be bored. It's
I
fine.
love it's interesting. We play a lot of like structured games at my house, a lot of board games, card games, things like that, which I know have their place, but it's still not the same as free play. And last weekend I had my boys who are similar in age to your kids. And we couldn't do anything with them. We were like, go do something on your own. And they made a 9-course mini golf course in our rec room. Like each hole. And I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. But
Right.
it reminded me how we don't do that often enough. We continue to structure even when I don't realize that we're structuring.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm wondering if you can speak to frustration tolerance. Teachers are reporting that kids are struggling with behaviors at school at levels they've never seen before. They're unable to attend and see tasks through. Does free play and some of what you're talking about help with that frustration tolerance piece?
Yeah, that's exactly the point of it. That is like one of the core elements that is learned during free play, during tolerating boredom, during requiring our brains, our bodies to feel the frustration. Because it's not, as psychologists, we never want to say like eliminate these feelings. Don't feel sad, don't feel anxious, don't feel frustrated. One, that's impossible. It's like telling someone not to sneeze or yawn, right? Like you can maybe hold it back a little bit, but not a reality. The reality is, how do we cope with it? How do we cope with it in a way that's adaptive, that doesn't then shut us down, doesn't then lead us to cry overwhelmingly in an inappropriate way that then we can't focus and function? And so, for instance, your kids created this 9-hole golf course. I would imagine there was some frustration going into it. You have 2 kids. I'm sure at certain points they disagreed about the positioning and the placement. So that required communication, collaboration, frustration tolerance, pushing through all of that frustration and cooperating with each other. And so if we're not doing that outside, and outside, I don't mean like literally outside of our doors, but like outside of school, for instance, our brain is not acclimating, it's not reacting and then on its own readjusting back to a baseline where we can learn and function.
For
And
sure.
so that 9-hole golf course, that was your kids learning how to cope, learning how to self-regulate, learning how to cooperate and persevere.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean the flexibility piece of it too. I mean, like they would try something and it didn't work, and they're like, "Oh, we got to figure out a different way." And so you see, like you see all the different skills that they're building through those activities. And like I said, it's almost like a reminder of, oh, they need to be doing this more.
Well, it's good. You saw it, right? That's very valid.
I saw it. So
Right?
far, once in 2025. Somebody said, we struggle with our 6-year-old shutting down when she gets upset. She's really quick to cry. Sometimes she's so upset that she won't even respond to us when we try to ask what's wrong or how are you feeling. What tips do you have to help prevent her from getting so upset that she's just completely shut down?
Okay, that's a really good question. I see it all day long. And we work with parents all day long. So the idea would be, one, to validate the feelings. So to label. So for a 6-year-old, maybe she has an awareness of what she's feeling where she can label it. Like she can say, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, I'm angry. Okay, those are like the basic feelings. And there are more, but in this one example. And so first would be to label it. And you can label it for them. She may correct you and say, I'm not sad, I'm angry. And you could say, okay, you're so angry right now. And that's all I would encourage you to do to start. Okay, so that's the validation piece. Is you're upset, you're frustrated, you're having a hard time. And then for a 6-year-old, okay, so let me go back to biology. Okay, so our basic biology is that we are born with our midbrain and the bottom part of our brain fully intact. So that is our amygdala, our hypothalamus, and our vagus nerves. It's our fight and flight response. It's what keeps us alive. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't cry when we're hungry as newborns. We wouldn't cry when we're afraid as newborns. We would walk into dangerous parts. We'd walk across the highway. We would do things that would make us die. We would die as a species. So we are fully intact when we're born with our emotion regulation system. The problem with that, so our brains are incredible. Okay, it is the most incredible muscle. But the problem is that our frontal lobe, our top brain, is not developed really at all until truly like 26. Okay, so the reason why that's a challenge is that coping skills are learned. They aren't innate. Breathing is innate, right? We have to breathe. Our body's going to breathe whether we want it to or not. It's really hard to suffocate yourself. But breathing on its own, if we're breathing incorrectly when we're in distress, will actually keep our brain and our heart from coding whatever's going on as stressful or distressing. So learning coping skills at a really young age, it's never really too young. So at 6 years old, for us to teach your child how to cope, how to self-soothe, how to self-regulate, how to communicate what is going on and why, will only ensure that then as they grow up, they know how to self-regulate. They know when they are coping, that once they're coping, that they then can either problem solve, because we can't problem solve when we're in emotion mind. Our brain is not that, unfortunately, our brain is not that advanced that if we are overly emotional or we're emotional really at all, we can't come up with solutions. So first we need to re-regulate back to a baseline enough so that then we can come up with what to do next. And if we don't have the skills to bring ourselves back down, then it all looks dysregulated. So it would be labeling the feelings, identifying physically what's going on, coming up with the words to then say what you feel, then coming up with coping skills that help your child get to a place where that they then can problem solve, and then go to a trusted adult to help them, because they're only 6. So like they're not meant to solve life's problems alone, right? Like we want to support your kid.
Yeah.
Right.
Not quite yet, right? Thank you. I want to just note a couple of comments that people have made. One to that point is, at 6, maybe they're not ready, but even as teenagers, they're often not ready. And so somebody commented that we need a high school class to teach some of these skills. I think we're seeing gaps in what our kids are currently confident and able enough to do independently. And yeah.
Yes, that is a great idea. So that goes along with, I think, your initial question, Lisa, of like, what do we do? How do we do this on a bigger scale? That's a great idea. So Lisa, maybe we go to the high schools.
Perfect. Let's do it in all of our spare time, right?
Yeah, right. I don't have anything, right.
Well, And two other ideas here. One doesn't take a lot of time, but what somebody said here, we as parents have to model this too. We're constantly holding our own phones. We have to think about what message we're sending. And I know that's something that we've been working on really hard in my household, but it's something that doesn't take a lot of time, and in fact ends up freeing up a lot of time to be present with our kids. And I think it's a really important one to note that it starts with us.
Yes, yes, it does.
And then there was a question about whether Catch organizes events for kids to get together. The answer to that is no, or maybe not yet, but I very much agree with that sentiment that it has to start somewhere. And I think we're all trying to figure out like who can we glob onto and what schools or organizations can we tap into to really try to find the masses of people that want to move forward with things in that way. I wanted to touch on something you mentioned a few times, and I think it's part of a barrier to why people don't do this more. You know, you gave the example of like our brains aren't developed yet, and so we might dart into a street, right? Like there's things we have to watch that our kids not do that really are safety issues. But I've been reading a lot lately about this idea of the difference between risk and danger. And this
Yeah.
idea that, you know, as you're describing play and getting frustrated and things not working and having to problem solve, there has to be some risk inherent in the free play that they're engaging in. And I think we're risk averse for our children. We fear that it's going to make them like get hurt either emotionally or physically. But I think we might be mixing that up with danger. Nobody wants to let their kid touch a hot stove or run into a busy street. Those are dangerous things that we need to be there to help actively avoid until they're old enough. But that risk piece, I don't think we talk about enough. Can you share anything about that?
Yes, yeah. So, you know, I think that's a really interesting point that actually goes more along with parents' tolerance of letting their kids take chances. And I think if we are to start at a really young age, promoting our kids to do things that they may not truly be able to do, like for instance, I mean, both of my kids are beyond the walking, learning how to walk stage. But what I was instructed to do with both kids was to not carry my kids around everywhere I went, was to let them be on the ground, right? Like put them down, right? And by putting my kids down, what it did was it gave way for them to try and do things on their own. And I think as parents, what we do is we want to protect them. We want to do everything we can to make sure that they don't get hurt. And there is a detriment to that, to their development. So, you know, I would never encourage parents to just say, go free, you know, go roam free and play if you don't live in an area that can allow for that. But it's called scaffolding in psychology. It's that you don't start at level 10. You don't start at the highest height if you're working on an exposure to heights because if someone's afraid. You start small and you say, okay, well, what would you like to do? Where would you like to ride your bike? What store would you like to go in and out of? And so I wouldn't say to my 6-year-old, okay, I'm going to be at home and I can't see downtown. I live in Northbrook. I can't see downtown Northbrook from my home. I wouldn't say go ride your bike to Northbrook and go buy yourself an ice cream and come back. But what I would say is, okay, like I'm not going to order for you at the counter. Like I will launch you up because it's a really high counter at Graders or at Baskin Robbins. He can see you order for yourself. And so the more he tries and the more I can see that he's successfully doing it, the more confident and comfortable I feel at establishing further goals, of letting him ride around, of letting him go play, and eventually, hopefully, letting him ride his bike around the entire town and go to the skate park. And maybe not even tracking him. I don't know yet. I'm still to be decided on that. But the idea is that we don't want to start in a place that we as parents feel uncomfortable. But at the same time, we need to feel a little bit uncomfortable knowing that it's so important for our kids to try. And so each family is different, but that would just be the much more larger macro picture of how to support this.
Absolutely. And we've got some comments coming in from people saying, like, I'm a teacher and I'd love to get some of these things started. Somebody mentioned Greenbrier having a wellness committee that's developing some parent and child activities and events to implement. There's wait till eighth groups that many of our neighborhoods and schools, in certain grades in particular, are really starting to catch. So I think we're moving in that right direction. There was one here. So somebody mentioned that Tina Payne Bryson just wrote a book called The Ways of Play. I haven't read it yet, but I heard a great interview, and it sounds like an instruction book for parents on this topic for people that are interested. And somebody else said here, to the point about risk, it's not just about letting our kids take chances, but getting comfortable with watching our kids be sad, uncomfortable, frustrated, not just physically hurt. And I think that is a huge one and so important, and something that I do think a lot of parents, myself very much included, do struggle with.
Yeah, right, me too. Yes. Yeah.
We don't want our kids to not feel good. And at the same time, I think the part that we forget there is that they have to learn how to not feel good, how to feel uncomfortable, how to feel sad, how to feel worried, how to feel frustrated, because that's how they also learn how to move through those feelings. If we make it our job to prevent them from ever feeling that way, then they don't learn how to cope with those emotions, and they become really much bigger problems later on in their lives because they haven't learned how to deal with it effectively.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think that covered all the questions that came in. Yeah, very good. I think we are good. Thank you so much for bringing just such relevant and important information to our community. I know you're on this journey with me, and we're all doing the best that we can to just continue to spread the messaging so that we can feel that ripple effect in the community as well. And these insights and your information was really super valuable. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And I'd love to just draw everyone's attention to the next couple of things that CATCH has coming up. Andrea, if you're able to
let me put that back up.
Yeah, that would be great. We have a couple more really amazing programs coming up. We have another Lunch and Learn. Our next one is in March, on March 11th, 12 to 1. Join us with Dr. Ashley Leha, who's going to be talking about social concerns. My kid's been ghosted. How do I help them? And really how we help them move through those things and how we help ourselves move through that as well. And then on the next slide, you'll see a couple of other things we have coming up. Andrea, if you're able to, perfect. We got, so we have a community fundraising event, Pickle for a Purpose. Anyone that's interested in either playing pickleball in a tournament or just coming to enjoy a lovely evening, that's coming up on Friday, February 28th. And then we've got our community 5K run for CATCH, which is on April 5th. And our big in-person event for this spring is going to be Doug Bolton speaking about parenting myths that he is going to debunk for us on Thursday, May 1st in the evening. Thank you all for being here. And thank you again, Andrea, for just sharing your wisdom on these topics. We so appreciate it.
Of course, you're welcome. Thanks, guys.
Have a great day.